In recent weeks, there has been a flurry of misinformation published regarding the case of Lucy Letby. This has appeared in various mainstream articles, interviews, and documentaries created by individuals who did not attend the trial. To help dispel these falsehoods, this video will be the start of a brand new series that dives deeper into the case of Lucy Letby. The following information is taken directly from transcripts approved by the court, further details of which can be found in the video description box below. The main goal of this series is to remove any personal opinion or bias and simply present the facts of this case as told in court. Now, at the end of 9 months of hearing evidence against Lucy Letby, the jury were presented with the following summary of the prosecution's case. This took place at Manchester Crown Court and was conducted by Nicholas Johnson, KC. It probably seems an awfully long time ago, that date in October when I stood here and introduced you to this case. I told you then that I was really only going to give you an introduction and that I wouldn't go into very much detail. And you probably sat there and thought, oh yeah, he's been going on for days. Well, the detail I gave you back then is nothing compared now to what you know about this case, is it? And what I'm going to say to you now will be a bit more detailed than what I said to you back then, because you understand now what really matters in this case, and the detail does matter. When we opened the case to you, we gave you a strictly chronological presentation. As we called the evidence before you, we gave you pretty much a strictly chronological presentation with the exception of the case of child K. When Lucy Letby gave evidence, with the exception of me dealing with child F alongside the case of child L, I dealt with things chronologically. And you've had 7 or 8 months of chronological presentation, and indeed last Thursday his lordship said to you that when he sums up the case, he will likely adopt a chronological presentation. But our task at this stage is slightly different. What we need to do is to draw together the strands of this case, and from our point of view, drawing together the strands of this case dictates a slightly different approach to a chronological presentation. What we want to do is to point out the similarities of some of these cases, which are separated by weeks or sometimes even months. We want to point out the evolution of Lucy Letby's murderous assaults on these children, and we want to point out how calculating and devious she has been. This will involve dealing with the cases in a slightly different order. We suggest that Lucy Letby gaslighted the staff at the Countess of Chester Hospital, doctors and nurses alike, professional people with many, many years of combined experience. She persuaded them that what they knew in their heart of hearts to be utterly abnormal was just a run of bad luck. But we know, don't we, ladies and gentlemen? The laboratory-synthesized insulin ending up in the circulations of child F and child L wasn't just bad luck. And even Lucy Letby ultimately was prepared to accept that. I say even and ultimately because of what you know she wrote in her defense statement. When I asked her about child L and the fact that there was insulin in his dextrose, her response was, I'd have to be guided by the expert evidence. Well, we agree with that. Last Wednesday, Lucy Letby called evidence from Mr. Mansuti, picked from the obscurity of the antiquated cast-iron plumbing system of the Countess of Chester Hospital, to tell you about incidents in areas of the hospital that aren't actually relevant, many of them, to what happened in this case. He told us about an occasion when a paper towel was forced down the plug hole of the sink in Nursery 4 and water ended up on the floor. That wasn't relevant to anything that happened to any of these children. The fact that there may have been an occasion, a single occasion, apparently, when there was a backup in the sink in Nursery 1, doesn't explain what happened to the children in this case. If there'd been sewage on the floor at the time of any of these events, ladies and gentlemen, there would have been a record made at the time. Somebody would have remembered it. Mr. Mansuti couldn't tell us, could he, precisely when that incident happened? He thought it was sometime in 2015 or 2016. His evidence isn't going to help you decide this case. It was a distraction. He was called, we suggest, to seek to bolster the tattered credibility of Lucy Letby, and you might ask yourselves why. It's a good question. One single word, a very short word. Why? You heard from Dr. Marna Reedis that the liver injury to child O wasn't the result of misplaced CPR. Somebody assaulted him and caused that liver hemorrhage, and they injected child O with air. Child O didn't die by natural causes, did he? And the circumstances of child O's death, taken together with the insulin given to child F and child L, have nothing to do with the drains. Please, do not be distracted. Lucy Letby got away with her campaign of violence for so long because people didn't contemplate the possibility, the remotest possibility, of a nurse trying to kill tiny babies. When you first heard me describe back in October the facts of this case, you were probably thinking the same thing. But the insulin proves that somebody was trying to kill children, as does the case of child O. And it shows. All of those cases show the awful lengths to which that person was prepared to go. I say that person, ladies and gentlemen, because the similarities between many of these cases do show you, don't they, that it was a single person sabotaging children. And the coincidence of the presence of Lucy Letby on all these occasions shows who that person was. On the 14th of March this year, Dr. Breary made one of his several appearances in the witness box to tell you about the collapse of child O. As part of the cross-examination, he was accused of having confirmation bias and of seeing fault in Lucy Letby simply because she was always there when certain events happened. Lucy Letby had used ways of killing babies and trying to kill them that didn't leave much of a trace. Certainly nothing that was spotted at the time as being significant. And her behaviour had persuaded many of her colleagues that the collapses and deaths were normal. Many of them simply couldn't see the wood for the trees. Several post-mortem examinations in isolation didn't raise the alarm because no one was contemplating the possibility of foul play. And Dr. Breary met the accusation of confirmation bias very well, we suggest. When it was put to him on behalf of Lucy Letby, he said this: "I think you're making this a little bit more simplistic than it actually was, because it's not something that anybody wants to consider, considering that a member of your staff is harming babies." And actually, the senior nursing staff on the unit didn't believe this could be true, up to the point and beyond when the child O and P died. But the year was spent for predominantly myself and Dr. Jayram, but also my colleagues, with increasing suspicion with every episode. And none of us wanted to believe it either. But the fact that things in terms of practices were going from good to better, the fact that we were working on a very good unit that normally had very good results, this all became very exceptional. And then we stopped to take a step back and think about it. The nature of these collapses, the unexpected nature of them, the lack of response to resuscitation, the unusual rash that had been noted on a number of occasions, and each time the association with Nurse Letby. And that's nothing to do with confirmation bias, that's just statistically every time it happened, it became statistically more than probable. And that was raising our concerns to a point where, yes, that's when we escalated when we did. Now, Dr. Breary made the point later in evidence that same day that when these events were happening between June 2015 and June 2016, he and his colleagues didn't know that child F and child L had been poisoned with insulin. He didn't know what Dr. Marna Reedis would say about child O's liver either, did he? Dr. Jayram, on the 28th of February this year, when giving evidence about child K and child M, said this: "This was an unprecedented situation for us. Nobody trains us to deal with this, and as I've mentioned before, we work within a certain rulebook and a certain playing field. We're not thinking, could this be deliberate harm initially? These thoughts come into your head after a while and you put them away because it seems utterly preposterous. Then more and more happens." A few days earlier, on February 22nd, dealing with child M, he said, "We're taught to think about common things, less common things, very uncommon things, rare things. In the rules of engagement by which we work, we do not generally consider unnatural causes or deliberate things, and nothing like that at that stage was even being contemplated. It was simply an association, just as if there'd been any other member of staff or any other piece of equipment. That would have been commented on. Ladies and gentlemen, you may feel that deciding whether or not, for no good reason, some of the doctors had it in for Lucy Letby is important. It was certainly suggested to some of them on her behalf. That's why we asked Lucy Letby questions about it on a case-by-case basis, because it's easy to make general allegations, isn't it? What you are interested in, ladies and gentlemen, is evidence. So that brings us to what I called the Gang of Four, the conspiracy theory. I'm not asking you necessarily to look now, but if you were to go to paragraphs 11 to 13 of the defence statement, you would see a suggestion being made by Lucy Letby that the collapses and deaths that you have heard about were in some way the product of staff shortages or mistakes, or that in some way the doctors were insufficiently qualified. When we asked Lucy Letby about this when she was giving evidence, generally speaking, she said that the particulars of that were a matter for medical opinion. Well, it's not for her to prove anything. But you have had no medical opinion to suggest that there were any serious shortcomings, have you? If we, the prosecution, had called evidence about all the children that went through the Countess of Chester Hospital over this period, over that 12-month period, and examined their care or looked at staffing ratios, that wouldn't have helped you decide what happened to the 17 children named in this indictment. The only thing, or the only things that matter, ladies and gentlemen, is to concentrate on the issues in this case. Concentrate on those 17 children. Look at their problems and see where, if at all, there were shortcomings which might have explained their collapses or deaths. And that we have done together, haven't we? And we suggest that was a very uncomfortable exercise for Lucy Letby, particularly when she was put on the spot time and time again in the witness box to explain from her point of view what she was saying were the shortcomings, not the generalities, the specifics. What did she come up with? Well, I'll remind you. In the case of child A, it was a delay in inserting his long line to give him fluids. She also blamed Mel Taylor. If we agree, as she put it, that the cause of death was an air embolus. If we agree, coming from the witness box. If we agree that the cause of death was an air embolus. Well, we do agree, ladies and gentlemen. The prosecution do agree. We'll agree with Lucy Letby on that. Child A didn't die of dehydration, did he? Because that's in reality what's being offered up as the shortcoming. He went without fluids for 3 or 4 hours. He did die of an air embolus, but it wasn't Mel Taylor who supplied the air, was it? For child B, Lucy Letby could come up with no criticism of the care or staffing levels. For child C, nothing. For child D, again staffing levels were irrelevant, and the only criticism offered by Lucy Letby was the delay in giving her antibiotics. But child D didn't die from an infection, did she, ladies and gentlemen? In the case of child E, Lucy Letby's best effort was to suggest there was a delay in responding to child E's bleeding. But of course that depends on what the doctors were being told at the time, doesn't it? And whether they were being told the truth by the designated nurse as to what was really going on. It also begs the question of why child E was bleeding in the first place, doesn't it? Again, staffing levels are irrelevant. Staffing levels and mistakes had nothing to do with child F's problems because somebody poisoned him deliberately. With child G, again staffing levels were not relevant. Lucy Letby's best effort was to offer to blame her best friend nurse E for accidentally overfeeding child G, before she changed her mind and said she didn't believe Nurse E actually overfed child G. In child H's case, Lucy Letby questioned whether some of the drains were securely put in. That was the way she phrased it. She also said there was potential incompetence. Potential and potentially are words that she uses very often, aren't they? Potential incompetence with where the drains were put in. Of course, she isn't qualified to say, as it happens, and the doctors who actually carried out this exercise said there was no problem. The expert evidence called by the prosecution suggested there was no problem. And Professor Arthurs from Great Ormond Street, having looked at the radiographs, said there was no problem. Child I. Well, you'll remember there were 4 different events for child I. So far as the first, on the 30th of September, was concerned, Lucy Letby identified no issues. The second, October 13th, this is Lucy Letby's hawk-eyed spot of child I's pallor in the gloom of room 2. Ashley Hudson got the blame for that one, for not having child I on full monitoring for 48 hours after the antibiotics were stopped. But when we looked at the charts, as a matter of fact, child I had been off full monitoring for much longer than 48 hours. With the third incident the following night, October 14th, no issues identified. With child I's death on the night shift of the 22nd into the 23rd of October, she said that potentially medical staffing issues may have contributed. Dr. Chang had been called away to the delivery suite and Dr. Gibbs went home and returned within 30 minutes. The doctors weren't with child I throughout once she deteriorated. Well, we'll come to that, ladies and gentlemen, but given the opinion of Dr. Marnarides, we suggest that that too is a non-starter. In child J's case, Lucy Letby could identify no shortcomings or errors other than to say it was a very busy shift. Child L, he was poisoned with insulin, no staffing issues there. Child M, Lucy Letby said the unit was very stretched and that child M was not in a proper space. But like the others, there was nothing she could put her finger on. With child N on the 3rd of June, nothing. At handover on the 15th of June, she said that the unit was very busy. But child N was due to go home, wasn't he? And later on in the shift, she said there was an issue with intubation. Well, none of that deals with why child N needed to be intubated in the first place, does it? Or why he was bleeding. Even less is it evidence of some sort of staffing or operational deficiency. In the case of child O, it was suggested by Lucy Letby that there had been an issue with the inadequacy of dealing with the concerns raised by Sophie Ellis overnight, though neither the charts nor the evidence you heard from those who were there suggested that there was a problem. The best Lucy Letby could come up with in the case of his brother child P was that there were potentially issues with the chest drains, but I cannot say. Then finally, child Q. There was nothing. So much for staffing shortages and incompetence. So where is the evidence of the shortcomings alleged in the defence statement? Where is the evidence of the suggestions being put to the doctors on behalf of Lucy Letby? From what shortcomings were the Gang of Four trying to deflect? What was their motive, the Gang of Four, for scapegoating Lucy Letby? She didn't give you specifics. She hasn't told you the evidence for her theory. It's no answer for the defence to say that she, Lucy Letby, is not qualified to say because she is the one making the allegation. Just as we make the allegation here, we produce the evidence. The evidence is tested. As His Lordship told you last Thursday, and you have in writing, the questions asked by counsel are not, as much as we would like them to be, the questions we ask are not the evidence. That applies to us both. Lucy Letby has to prove nothing. There is no burden on her, but there is, as a matter of fact, no evidence to support her allegations. We've seen it put, haven't we, ladies and gentlemen, with enthusiasm to several of the medics that they are in some way part of a conspiracy to convict the innocent Lucy Letby. And it's been suggested that these people have invented evidence to persuade you that ultimately she is guilty. And when you are considering whether that suggestion has any credibility, you might ask yourselves the question, why would the doctors do that? One advantage you have had is seeing many of these alleged conspirators over and over again. Do you really think that Dr. Breary, Dr. Gibbs, Dr. B, or Dr. J-Ram would say things they knew were not true to get Lucy Letby convicted? When you're considering that question, you might like to pose yourself this question. What did the doctors say that wasn't true? What did they actually say that wasn't true? I put their important accounts to Lucy Letby as we went through each case individually. It may be that I missed it if she told us, but I suggest that there was very little, if anything, that she positively said was not true in what they, the doctors, had said. All she did say was that she had not seen what they say they saw. But the Gang of Four didn't do a very good job in scapegoating Lucy Letby, I suggest, because at the time they missed the evidence of the insulin poisonings, that disconnection in the ratio between C-peptide and insulin. So it's a conspiracy to scapegoat her where they, the conspirators, have actually missed the best bit of evidence. Astonishing. All the clues in the insulin cases point in one direction, don't they? And she's sitting at the back of the court. All the evidence suggests that the consultants at the hospital didn't even know about the wildly out of kilter ratio between insulin and C-peptide when they blew the whistle. Was that turning up just a bit of good luck from their point of view? Or does it prove in effect what we allege, that she was responsible? There's a very serious point in all this, ladies and gentlemen. Why, if there's no evidence to support it, is Lucy Letby so fixated on seeking to persuade you that there is a conspiracy amongst the doctors? Is it an attempt to divert you from what really happened, like the evidence from the plumber Mr. Mansuti? Lucy Letby, we say, put a lot of effort into trying to pull the wool over your eyes. You'll remember she spent a lot of the day on May 2nd, the first day she gave evidence, telling you all about isolation from her friends or her family on the unit, as she described them. That was her explanation for writing things like, "I am evil, I did this, I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough." That was her explanation for writing a letter or a note to the babies O, P and R, triplets, on their birthday. And we never did get an explanation for why it was addressed to Child R as well, did we? Even though she was asked the question. I'm not going to spend time now addressing you about Lucy Letby's notes. We will come back to them at the end, when we look at what she did before she left the unit at the end of June or the beginning of July 2016. Although, having said that, I'm not going to spend a lot of your time looking at Lucy Letby's notes. There are more important things in this case. Part of the truth, though, came out eventually. On Friday the 9th of June, we established that Lucy Letby was not isolated. So 5 weeks after she had put that forward as an explanation, she had to admit, didn't she, that she was still in contact with the people she had originally told you she had not been allowed to contact, and she had not contacted. Even though she knew what we had from her phone, she did actually repeat the lie, before I actually dealt with the detail briefly. But then we went to the spreadsheet, and the lie was exposed, wasn't it? Do you remember it being suggested to Dr. J-Ram, and I'm paraphrasing what was put to him? You think that just because you're a doctor, people would just accept what you say. We saw that in the witness box from Lucy Letby. She thought that if she said something often enough, whatever the evidence is, you will accept it. You might want to bear that in mind, ladies and gentlemen, when you're considering anything else that she has said at any point of this case.